I came home expecting memories, not the woman who pinned me to the wall, looked into my eyes, and whispered like she'd been waiting years for me to return. I hadn't planned on staying long. My hometown was supposed to be a brief stop, a quiet breath before returning to the life I'd built elsewhere. But the moment I stepped off the bus, a rush of old sensations tugged at me, the familiar rustle of wind moving through the narrow streets, the distant echo of kids playing soccer near the park, the warm smell of dust and evening air settling over the town like a blanket. I walked toward the old community center out of instinct. It hadn't changed much, the same faded green doors, the same cracked cement steps, the same heavy stillness inside. The hallway was dim, the kind of dimness that made everything seem frozen in time. I ran my fingertips along the rough, chipped paint on the wall, remembering how small my hand used to be compared to it. Every footstep I took seemed to stir up a memory, some innocent, some half-forgotten. I turned the corner toward the multipurpose room, expecting nothing more than nostalgia, but then I saw her. Mira. She stood at the far end of the hallway, framed by the soft rectangle of light coming from the cracked window behind her. She hadn't changed in the way that truly mattered. Her posture was still relaxed, one hip slightly leaned, arms folded loosely under her chest like she owned the space without meaning to. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose twist, strands falling naturally around her face, giving her an effortless, graceful confidence. But there was something new, too, something calm and controlled in her eyes, something that made the hallway feel suddenly warmer. When she saw me, she didn't smile. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying me with a quiet intensity that made my steps falter. As she began walking toward me, her heels tapped softly against the floor, slow, deliberate, each step folding into the next as if she'd rehearsed this moment without realizing it. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but my voice caught. She reached me before I could attempt a second try. Without warning, she lifted her arm and placed her hand against the wall beside me, leaning in just enough for her presence to press into my space. Not touching, not crowding, just close enough for the air to change between us. I felt the warmth radiating from her, subtle but impossible to ignore. Her eyes traveled over my face with a mixture of recognition and something like curiosity. Then, in a low, lightly amused voice, she murmured, "Forgot me already?" The words brushed against me like warm breath. I tried to laugh it off, but her fingers rose and grazed the sleeve of my shirt, barely a touch, more like a reminder she was real and standing right there. The sensation was soft, almost accidental, yet it sent a quiet shock through me. In that moment, everything about the hallway, its silence, its stillness, its memories, seemed to fold into the space between us. I wasn't looking at the older girl who used to tease me. I wasn't looking at a memory. I was looking at a woman who hadn't forgotten me at all. For a moment after she stepped back, the hallway felt different, warmer, fuller, like her presence had seeped into the walls themselves. Mira didn't say anything as she turned and walked a few steps ahead of me, but she glanced over her shoulder with a faint, knowing smile, as if silently telling me to follow. I did. We wandered through the community center together, each room pulling out pieces of our past like gently opened drawers. The gym still smelled faintly of old basketballs and cleaning solution. The storage room still had bicycles piled in the corner. And the courtyard outside still had the crooked bench we used to argue over. You could feel the history in every crack of the wood. "You remember when you fell off your bike right here?" Mira said, tapping her heel lightly against the pavement. "You cried so hard I thought your lungs would give out." I laughed under my breath. "You carried me inside. And you refused to let go of my shirt the entire time," she added, her eyes glimmering with quiet amusement. "Little Shadow." The nickname shouldn't have affected me, but hearing it now, spoken gently by a woman standing this close, carried a strange warmth. It made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect. We stepped back inside to escape the brightness of the courtyard. Sunlight slanted through the old stairwell window, dust drifting lazily in the beam of light. Mira stopped there, brushing her fingertips along the railing. "This place holds more of my life than I realized," she murmured. She wasn't talking to me, not fully, more to herself, like she was letting the memories breathe again. I found myself studying her in a way I never did before. The soft lines around her eyes from years of laughter. The calm steadiness in her posture. The grace she carried without trying. And maybe she felt my gaze, because she turned to look at me, really look at me, with a slow, thoughtful expression. She stepped closer and reached for the collar of my jacket, adjusting it with a simple, gentle motion. It should have been casual, but her thumb lingered near the base of my neck just a second too long. The touch was warm, light, intentional. My breath hitched before I could stop it. She noticed. A tiny smile curved her lips, not smug, not teasing, but something softer, like curiosity with a hint of satisfaction. When I instinctively stepped back, overwhelmed, she reached out and caught my forearm. Her fingers wrapped around my sleeve, warm and firm enough to stop me but gentle enough that I didn't tense. She drew me slightly closer, not chest to chest, but close enough that I felt the presence of her body like a quiet heat. "Mira," I began, not even sure what I planned to say. But she just held my gaze steadily, her voice lowering into something intimate yet calm. "You grew up differently than I expected." My pulse thudded in my ears. She didn't mean the physical growth. It was something else, something about the way I looked at her now, the way I spoke, stood, breathed. Something that changed the air between us. She let her hand slip from my arm slowly, fingertips trailing lightly down the fabric before falling away completely. But the warmth stayed. The cafe wasn't anything fancy, just a small corner shop with mismatched chairs and the smell of roasted beans drifting through the air. It sat across from the park, the same park where Mira once taught me how to ride a bike by bribing me with candy. The familiarity of it all wrapped around us like a quiet haze, comforting and strangely intimate. We chose a table by the window. Sunlight spilled across the wooden surface, warming our hands as we sat across from each other. For a moment, it felt like slipping into an old rhythm, the kind that didn't need effort or explanation. Mira stirred her coffee slowly, watching the spoon move in small circles. She looked composed, but there was something in the way her fingers tapped the ceramic cup, soft, rhythmic, almost absent-minded, that made me sense she wasn't as steady as she appeared. "So," I said gently, "how have things really been for you?" She looked up, surprised. Not because of the question, but because of the way I asked it, like I genuinely wanted to know, like I still saw her the way I used to when I was a kid, hanging on to her every word. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She exhaled slowly, letting her gaze drift to the window, where a couple walked by with their dog. Her hand tightened around the spoon before she placed it down carefully. "It's been a lot," she finally admitted. Her voice cracked just slightly, soft enough that most people would have missed it. But not me. I had always been good at noticing the small things in her. She straightened her posture, as if trying to rebuild the confident image she wore so easily. "My parents' health is getting worse. Work's been exhausting. And sometimes," she hesitated, pressing her thumb against the edge of her coffee cup, "sometimes I feel like I'm fading into the background of my own life." The cafe noise seemed to hush around us. Her vulnerability wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, worn, real. It made something inside me tighten in a way that felt protective. Without thinking, I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her fingers tensed beneath my palm for a heartbeat, like she wasn't used to being held. Then, slowly, she relaxed. Her hand fit beneath mine in a way that felt strangely natural. She looked down at our hands, then up at me. And in that moment, the confident older woman who teased me in the hallway was replaced by someone who had been carrying too much alone. "You don't have to pretend with me," I murmured. "You never did." Her eyes glistened faintly in the warm afternoon light. She blinked, but the emotion stayed, shimmering just enough to soften her whole expression. "Why is it," she whispered, "that you always see the parts one tried to hide?" I didn't have an answer. I only knew that sitting there, with her hand beneath mine and the sunlight wrapping around us, something deep and unspoken settled between us, something that felt like trust, and maybe the beginning of something neither of us had expected. She turned her palm slightly, letting her fingers curl around mine. The sun had already begun its slow descent by the time we left the cafe. The sky carried that soft, late evening glow, warm orange fading into gentle blue, the kind that makes everything feel quieter, more thoughtful. Mira walked beside me along the narrow sidewalk, her hands tucked lightly into her coat pockets, her steps unhurried. The pace matched the atmosphere between us, gently shifting, quietly deepening. We didn't talk much at first. The comfortable silence between us felt better than any conversation we could have forced. Every now and then, our arms brushed, just a soft, fleeting touch, but each time it happened, my breath caught faster than it should have. She didn't seem bothered by it. In fact, she walked close enough that our shoulders occasionally aligned, warm fabric grazing warm fabric. As we reached the entrance of the community center, a soft breeze drifted through the alley. Mira shivered, not dramatically, just a small tremor in her shoulders, the kind you only notice when you're paying close attention. Without thinking, I slid my jacket off and held it out to her. She looked at it, then at me, then took a slow, single step closer. Instead of reaching for the jacket, she let the distance close until our arms brushed again, but this time she didn't pull away. She stood there quietly, her warmth mixing with mine, her breath close enough that it stirred the air between us. "You don't have to freeze just to look polite," I said softly. "I'm fine," she whispered, her voice carrying the faintest smile. "But thank you." The way she looked at me then, calm, steady, with a tenderness she didn't try to hide, made my chest feel too full. "You've always been like this," she added. "Trying to take care of people even when no one asks?" "I don't mind," I replied. Her gaze softened even more, almost melting at the edges. She reached out slowly, so slowly that I felt the intention before her fingers even touched me. Then her hand came to rest on my chest, lightly, right above my sternum. The warmth of her palm spread through my shirt, steady and grounding. For a moment I didn't breathe. She looked down at her own hand resting against me, as if surprised by her own boldness. But she didn't pull away. Her thumb moved slightly, just a small, careful stroke through the fabric, barely there but unmistakably intimate. "You remind me." Her voice was quiet, almost carried away by the breeze. "Of warmth I forgot I needed." My heart thudded once, hard. The honesty in her tone wasn't flirtation. It wasn't playful. It was vulnerable, raw enough that I felt a protective ache rise in me. I covered her hand with mine, holding it gently against my chest. Not to keep her there, but to show her it was okay. That I didn't mind the closeness. That maybe I needed it too. She inhaled softly, a tiny, unsteady breath that said more than any confession could. For a long, suspended moment, we just stood there, her hand beneath mine, the evening light settling around us, and the quiet realization that something between us had shifted. Not sudden. Not dramatic. That night sleep felt impossible. I lay in my old room, same ceiling fan, same creaky window, yet everything felt different. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Myra's hand resting on my chest, felt the quiet warmth of her breath near my shoulder, heard the softness in her voice when she told me I reminded her of warmth she'd forgotten. It was just a moment. A simple moment. But it carried weight, more than either of us had expected. And somewhere, beneath all the warmth and closeness, a new feeling curled inside me, hesitation. Because Mira wasn't just anyone from my past. She was older, more experienced, someone who had lived through storms I hadn't yet faced. Someone people looked up to, and someone people might question if they saw her with me. A truth I didn't want to admit settled in my chest. I wasn't afraid of my feelings. I was afraid of making her life harder. The next morning, I found her sitting on the community center steps, arms wrapped loosely around her knees. Her hair was pulled into a messy half-twist, the kind she wore only when she wasn't trying to present herself perfectly. The sight alone told me she hadn't slept much either. When she lifted her head and saw me approach, she smiled, but it was smaller, guarded, missing the easy warmth from yesterday. "Morning," I said. "Hey," she replied softly. There was a fragile quiet between us, delicate as thin glass. She patted the spot beside her, so I sat, the cold stone step brushing against my palms. Rough night? I asked gently. She let out a humorless laugh. You could say that. Her fingers played with the seam of her sleeve, twisting it slowly. It was a nervous gesture, one I had never seen from her before. Mira, I said quietly. What's going on? She didn't answer right away. She stared out at the empty street, jaw tightening just slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but heavy, like each word carried something she'd been holding back for too long. She exhaled shakily. I don't want to be something you regret later. My chest tightened. She kept her gaze fixed ahead. People talk. They always do. And I'm at a point in my life where I'm supposed to be wiser. Controlled. Responsible. She laughed weakly. Not getting close to someone younger who should be building their life without complications. I turned toward her, slowly, carefully, and laid my hand over hers. Her fingers were cool, tense, so I held them with just enough warmth to steady her. You're not a complication, I said. Her eyes flicked to mine, uncertain, searching. You think I'm worried about what people might say, I continued. But the only thing I'm worried about is hurting you. Or making you feel like this connection is something you have to hide. Her breath hitched at that. A small, unguarded sound. She looked down at our joined hands, her thumb brushing weakly against my palm like she wanted to believe me but didn't trust herself to. I don't want to be a mistake in your story, she whispered. I tightened my hold just a little. Not forceful, just steady, reassuring. You could never be a mistake, I said. Not to me. The tension in her shoulders softened. Not entirely, but enough for her to lean closer, her arm brushing mine in a silent admission of how much she needed this, needed honesty, safety, reassurance. The wind picked up as the afternoon settled in, rustling the leaves near the community center entrance. Mira and I stayed seated on the stone steps, neither of us moving, as if shifting even an inch would break the fragile honesty hanging between us. Her hand still rested beneath mine, and though she wasn't pulling away, I could feel the uncertainty trembling faintly through her fingers. I didn't want that tremble to stay. So I shifted slightly, slow enough that she could see my intention, and turned to face her more fully. Mira, I whispered. Look at me. She hesitated, but then slowly lifted her eyes to mine. Her gaze held so many layers, strength, doubt, longing, and a fear she was trying desperately to swallow. It made my chest ache. You said you don't want to be a mistake in my story, I continued softly. But you forget something important. I gently brushed my thumb over the back of her hand, light, slow, reassuring. You're one of the few people who shaped it. Her breath caught, barely audible. When I was younger, I said, voice steady, you were the one person who made this town feel warm. Safe. Like it had meaning. I took a slow breath. And yesterday, when you put your hand on my chest, I realized it wasn't just nostalgia. I felt something real. Something I hadn't expected. Her cheeks warmed at the memory, just a faint, soft flush, but she didn't look away. The vulnerability in her eyes was raw, so I softened my tone even more. I know the age difference scares you, I said. I know the world might misunderstand. I paused, choosing each word with care. But the world doesn't get to decide what feels right for us. Something inside her seemed to waver, like a wall she'd braced her whole life was finally starting to crack. She shifted closer, almost unconsciously, her knee brushing mine. The brief contact sent a warmth through me that was quiet but powerful. You're too young to be this sure, she whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempt at control. I shook my head gently. I'm not a kid anymore, Mira. She closed her eyes for a moment, not to shut me out, but as if she needed to steady herself. When she opened them again, the uncertainty was still there, but so was something deeper. Something braver. She lifted her hand slowly, tentatively, and brought it up to my face. Her fingertips grazed my jawline, soft, slow, with a tenderness that made my breath falter. She traced the line of my cheekbone, her touch warm and delicate. The way she touched me wasn't playful. It wasn't teasing. It was cautious, reverent, almost disbelieving. "I don't know if I deserve this," she whispered, her fingers still resting lightly against my cheek. I turned my head slightly, letting her palm settle more fully against my skin. "You deserve more than you've ever allowed yourself to believe." Her eyes glistened, not with tears, but with a softness I had never seen from her, a softness that made my heart fold in on itself. She breathed in shakily and leaned forward, slowly, carefully, until her forehead rested gently against mine. The warmth of her skin, the quiet closeness of her breath, the way her body relaxed in that tiny, precious contact, it all wrapped around me in a way that felt like a promise forming between us. Not spoken aloud, but felt deeply. And when she whispered, barely audible, "I'm scared," I answered just as softly, "I'm here." And for the first time, she believed me. The night settles around us softly, the kind of warm stillness that makes every sound feel closer, every breath a little more shared. We walk back toward her porch at an unhurried pace, like either of us wants the evening to reach its end. The yard is dim, lit only by a single porch light that casts a gentle gold halo over her shoulders. She's walking just ahead of me, her hands occasionally brushing against mine as though pulled by instinct rather than intention. When she stops, she doesn't turn immediately. She stands there for a few seconds, breathing in, breathing out, steadying herself. I've learned her silences. This one is full of courage gathering itself. When she finally turns, her expression is soft but serious, her eyes darker in the low light, reflecting a quiet decision she's carried a long time. "I didn't mean to pin you to the wall that day," she says with a faint smile. "But I guess I needed you to really look at me. After all these years." I step closer, slow enough to make sure the moment stays grounded, real. "I did look at you," I tell her. "I just didn't know what I was supposed to do with everything I felt." The confession seems to soften her. Her shoulders ease. Her breath shakes once, barely. She lifts her hand, hesitant at first, and rests it lightly against my chest. The warmth of her palm sinks through the fabric, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. It's a simple touch, but charged with years of unsaid words. "I thought I'd imagined it," she murmurs. "The way your eyes followed me sometimes. The way you'd go quiet whenever I stood too close." I huff out a quiet, almost embarrassed laugh. "You didn't imagine anything." The truth makes something bright flicker in her expression. Not triumph, more like relief, like she's finally letting herself believe in something she didn't dare hope for. I take her hand gently, turning it so her fingers fit between mine. She looks down at our joined hands with a softness that tugs at my chest. "You know," I say quietly, "I always thought you were out of reach. Strong, composed, untouchable. Even today, when you pushed me back against that wall, I felt like I was 18 again, completely overwhelmed by you." Her breath catches at that, and I feel her thumb brush slightly across my knuckles, a slow, thoughtful stroke. "I wasn't trying to overwhelm you," she whispers. "I just didn't want you to forget me." I shake my head. "I never forgot you." Not for a single day. There's a pause, gentle, fragile, suspended between us. Then she steps close enough that her forehead rests lightly against mine. Her breath mixes with mine, warm and steady. My hands slide to her waist, not pulling, just holding, giving her all the space to decide the next move. When she finally speaks, her voice is barely above a whisper. "Then let's stop pretending we don't know what this is." And in that quiet, under the soft porch light, with her hands over my heart and my arms around her, everything we avoided for years finally settles into place, honest, warm, and beautifully real.